there's too much to possibly get through. But I'll try and just. I don't know if I'm going to make any cogent thread throughout this, but there's just lots of random bits to explain. Um, there is a lot of dirty laundry around at the moment and a lot of fake narratives. And there's pushback on those narratives on the right side, but with motivated reasoning. And this is the problem that we've constantly had in Bitcoin, because sometimes the good guys win and they bring everyone along with them, along with flawed reasoning about why we won or why things needed to go the way they went. And people are on the winning team anyway, and they pat themselves on the back because if you win, presumably everything you did was right. But sometimes you win even though you made mistakes. And here's the hard part. For a few years now, I've been feeling not right about elements that went on in the block size wars. And I've made this point before because it's very easy to act smug because we won. But there are certain elements to the conflict that don't sit right with me. And I guess the main one, the elephant in the room with it really, is the fact that in their ignorance, they thought they were so correct about the direction Bitcoin needed to go in that they started looking for smoking guns, compromised people, so to speak, malicious funding, and going to, ill-motivated developers, stuff like that. And this was the conspiracy theories around Blockstream and all that. And that was targeted mainly at Adam Back and Greg Maxwell. And those guys spent years defending themselves. And then obviously the big blockers eventually combined with Craig, and Craig ended up suing a bunch of those guys and making their life a misery, as well as a bunch of other core developers and other people that were small blockers. And it was clear who were the good and bad guys in it. But a lot of what they uncovered, the sleuths in the Bcash camp about Blockstream, turns out to be not as untrue as we would have liked. And I'm obviously mainly referring to the Epstein leaks, and the way that got interpreted, unfortunately, due to our own inability to clean our own dirty laundry, we now look pretty terrible on the world stage. And it got to the point where there's a lot of people out there that said Epstein is the creator of Bitcoin, which is silly if you know anything about it, or if you've ever watched Epstein try to put a sentence together. He's obviously not an intelligent guy, and in his emails you can see he didn't really understand Bitcoin. So either side trying to say Epstein is corrupting Bitcoin, either side in the current conflict, is reaching, in my opinion. I've seen people on my side make the allegation that they're all, Epstein was trying to corrupt them. But as far as I can tell, Epstein's funding went more towards the big blocker side than the small blocker side. And I don't think he has any relevance in what's going on now. And so all that being the case, what am I really alluding to here? Well, it's just the fact that you have really awful people doing awful things. You have Brian Bishop, who is pretty significant because the Bitcoin mailing list is an essential part of getting a BIP, looked at and approved. And he's out there offering Epstein anonymity to invest in his designer babies thing. This really was the grossest thing in the whole leak. Because, genetically screwing around making designer babies is just so utterly abhorrent and such a slap in the face to all that is good in the world that anyone that is into that kind of industry is just revolting. But there he is talking about countries where they can get away with doing things that they'd be ethically and legally prevented from doing in other countries, and offering Epstein anonymity for his investment. He said that would protect Epstein's reputation. So even acknowledging the dislike people have of that field, and quite rightly so, that just feels just that made me want to throw up. That's absolutely revolting. And then you have Austin Hill, who I believe was a co-founder of Blockstream, just trying to organize time together. And they seem to have planned a trip to Little St. James, aka Epstein Island. And it's some digging people I know did makes it pretty clear that and Adam and other people probably went to Epstein Island. Adam came out with a statement saying, look, Epstein invested and he divested his shares pretty quick, and that's the end of it. He never made any comment about the island. Now, I do think it's a bit, I think it's a bit convenient for me to be like, Adam doesn't agree with me, and he seems to have been arguing in bad faith too. Therefore, he's been corrupted by Epstein and Epstein's people to destroy Bitcoin by filling it up with spam. I'm not gonna go for that. It's a little bit it's a little bit obvious. I don't think so. But Adam is actually clearly saying untrue things and has been for a while. So it's a very convenient political turnout from my side in the spam war. But you know, I think part of the reason we're in the mess we're in at the moment is because we take wins when we can get them, even if we don't really deserve them. And I think it just comes down to making arguments based on what the software is doing, and you can backward rationalize it and say, well, someone is trying to merge some bad code into Bitcoin. Let's do some digging. Let's see where their funding is coming from, etc. But at the end of the day, the bad code was the bad code. And that's the most important thing of it. And I don't want to sit here being in tinfoil hat mode, casting aspersions about people on the other side of it that might turn out not to be true. Because there is, like, Greg is out there, it seems lying, because he said Epstein has never funded core development. He said that there's some horrible Reddit post where he's doing his normal thing where he just eviscerates someone he disagrees with. He's just utterly brutal person in an argument. He's just completely uncivil person, and it makes it so unpleasant to argue with him that you just get so appalled at the tone of the conversation that you have to withdraw from it. And then he claims victory based on that. But unfortunately, this is a lack of civility is a type of, it is just a bullying mechanism where you get to walk away and say, I won this debate, I won that debate, and everyone watching gets to say, oh, Greg is holy Greg. But I've had loads of conversations with Greg where he's clearly been wrong, and he walks away like he won anyway. He's obviously incredibly intelligent, but he is unprepared to lose an argument. And he spent years arguing with big blockers. And a lot of those guys, I'm sorry to say it, I'm not going to be kind to anyone in this video, including people on my side. So don't think I'm cherry picking here. But a lot of the big blockers were really just not all that bright. They did fall for a very convincing narrative from Roger Ver that, Bitcoin is being hijacked. And as Francis rightly pointed out in his recent video, they were big Bitcoin. The big blockers were big Bitcoin. They had the big exchanges. They had BitPay and Coinbase, which were enormous entities. They had a whole bunch of other stuff. They had wallet people. They had they had Gavin, who was number 2 after Satoshi. They had a lot. They had Bitcoin.com. They had the Bitcoin handle on Twitter. And that is a lot to have. And they always presented themselves as though they were the underdogs. And they really weren't. The corporate side of the industry was on the big block side. It was the core developers, amazingly for the most part, and the plebs that actually won against the big blockers. Nowadays, I believe that the industrial, the Bitcoin industrial complex, as I guess Simon Dixon would call it, they are on the pro-spam side, and all that's left fighting against it is the plebs and Luke, and that's basically all you have now. Big Bitcoin, now all the same names that were on the underdog side, in 2017, and now on the now they're all just, the big companies are basically chain code, Spiral, Brink. It's just about funding for devs that aren't particularly interested in Bitcoin in the deep sense. So anyway, back to Greg. Greg was on one of those, used to just spend all day taking candy from babies, and arguing with idiot BSVers and Bcashers, and he would always hand their ass to them. And I used to take some screenshots of it every now and again because that was it. Like, I needed to justify my side as a small blocker, and I needed to demonstrate the bad faith of the other side, because it's a tempting shortcut. When people are throwing endless arguments at you, there's always the temptation to do some mic drop shortcut response where someone on the other side acts in bad faith and you get to dismiss everything based on that, because you don't have time to argue everything from first principles all the time with people that are genuine on the other side. You think, what if I just take a shortcut here and show a time Roger Ver told a ridiculously dishonest lie and never owned it? Like, you can do that. But unfortunately, that seems to have happened on our side too. And it's not necessarily quite to the same degree, but there are posts from people accusing Greg, saying, Blockstream, you guys are funded by Epstein. Core development, the small blockers, got funding from Epstein. And while I think that's not true, the denial Greg gave turns out not to be true either. Turns out Epstein totally did invest in Blockstream. And it turns out there was, Austin Hill, Austin Hill just, like, I didn't even finish what I was saying about him. He emailed Epstein on the day that, is it Virginia Jeffrey, that woman who was one of the first to blow the whistle and who got suicided by, she said, I'm of sound mind. I'm not going to do anything to myself. And a few days later, she was dead. Without her, I don't think any of the stuff about, Ghislaine Maxwell and Epstein would have really kicked off the way it did and come back so strongly. The day that kicked off, Austin emailed Jeffrey, at this time a well-known, guilty person of soliciting prostitution from minors, yada yada, someone who's already invested, blah blah, you have relationship with. You at this point, you know who this guy is. The email said, I know you're in the middle of a media hit job right now, or something like that. Assuming that Epstein was the victim in this and that someone was unfairly accusing him of sexual misconduct. Just like, I can't fathom the ethics of that. Like, Blockstream were already oversubscribed for investment. It's such a surprise to me that they would go for that. But I mean, I've been through a little bit of this. I know what it's like getting investment and raising money. You don't want to offend it. You want to take what you can get. And you're a beggar. Raising money makes you a beggar, pretty much, and beggars can't be choosers. So again, all this stuff that I'm bringing up, it makes me sick. It makes me admit that there is just dirty laundry everywhere. Because the big blockers, if they want to pretend they were the good side too, Roger was incredibly dishonest too. The big blockers lied a lot. Jihan Wu was quite dishonest in that. I mean, there was a language barrier there, so it's maybe he was acting in good faith. I don't know. It's kind of hard to look back and really remember it well. But I just don't think anyone on either side can look back at it and go, yeah, well, we acted with integrity. Because really what just happened was Bitcoin went the way it went because the inert nature of it meant doing something as against the grain as having big blocks would have been really difficult. They needed so much support to get something like that together. They didn't have it. But they still exist to this day. The Bcashers are still there. And there's even the Craig Wright nut jobs that are still out there saying BSV is the real Bitcoin. Maybe they're just bots. I don't know. But I hate dismissing people because they genuinely may believe the things a lot of them just genuinely believe the things they say. And they assume we're all disingenuous and we all assume they're disingenuous. So that amount of dirty laundry, it needs to be aired, because the fact that it wasn't, and the fact that we walk away like we won because we were right and we acted with integrity and the other side were the bad guys and they didn't, the fact that we view it in that way means we now have nothing when the world is coming to us and saying, "Hey, Bitcoin was invented by Epstein," and you have attacks from everywhere. You have big blockers saying, "We told you, Blockstream were the bad guys. Look, they're funded by Epstein." Now that is an untruthful narrative when you put it in the context that Epstein funded Coinbase way more significantly, and Coinbase was on Roger's side, the crypto side of the whole thing. It's dishonest. But the fact that we haven't owned our own stink in that regard is a problem for us, because we do have people that you're not going to want. I don't know, let me say it in a way that's not going to get me in too much trouble. Like people like Adam Back and Peter Todd, they are people I'm going to avoid. Just I'll put it as lightly as that. They are obviously people I'm going to avoid at this point. You can take from that whatever you need to take. And I watched I just referenced what Francis was talking about, and Francis made a great point contrasting big Bitcoin versus the underdogs, and saying Roger flipped it the opposite way. Big Bitcoin tried to hijack Bitcoin and it failed, and the Bitcoiners managed to hold on to control. And that's the correct framing for it. It certainly is. But he also goes on to say, therefore, Bitcoin is unhijackable. It cannot be hijacked. And he tried to hijack it and he failed. And that's where I disagree, because I believe Bitcoin is trivial to hijack if you know how to go about it. And that's what I perceive as happening at the moment. It just takes complacency of the community for Bitcoin to suddenly flip from being everything we ever dreamed of to being a CBDC. The difference is the C. It's just about centralization. That's it. Nothing else about Bitcoin's design is conducive to freedom if you don't have the decentralized aspect. Worse, it's a tool of enslavement. And this has been my fear forever, because Bitcoin it is turnkey tyranny, as Snowden would describe it, if it's not handled correctly. And it's so easy for it to turn into an absolute nightmare. And that's been my concern forever. And I can very easily lay out the steps of why what has been going on in the last few years can lead us down a very bad path. So, switching gears for a minute. A few videos ago, I made an update after the Core 30 bug was deleting people's wallets. And ironically, I'm going to celebrate the approach I took there, despite the fact that all I was advocating for was humility. So obviously I'm not going to be patting myself on the back too much in order to stay congruent with that. But I knew that all the temptations on my side of the aisle with this, the spat between what's going on with Core and the pro-spam side of Bitcoin, or the we can't do anything about it side, versus my side, every temptation we have was to go after them and rip them to pieces. They had a new release, it was hotly anticipated, it was controversial, and it turned out to be deleting people's wallets. But then the message of that video was that bugs can happen to anyone, and I knew if I come out swinging over that, all that's going to happen is something goes wrong in Knots or BIP110, and then I'm going to look like the dumbest hypocrite ever. And that is politics. That is how people operate in politics. But I think Bitcoiners are better than that. And I thought, this is going to be a mess. BIP110 is going to have issues with it. Knots is going to have issues with it. And it's going below the belt by ripping people to pieces for bugs, which happens to everyone, just makes a bad situation even worse. So I'm very glad that I did that, because we've had a couple of issues with BIP110 that got uncovered by none other than one of them is a core contributor, a core developer, Lawrence, I think is his actual name. I don't know. I've heard people call him Lawrence. I'm not, but he goes by Lawrence. I've debated him before and always found his points to be very trivially, obviously not correct. Like sort of facile appeals to open markets. with no understanding of why certain principles don't apply in certain contexts, and applying them there is disingenuous. But that's not the point. He in a very professional manner, just found something wrong with BIP10, announced it, didn't keep it up his sleeve, and that's been fixed. And there was another issue with a guy, Vol something, I forget his name. I don't know if he's a core guy or whatever, but he found another issue, not so kindly in that circumstance, because he just hashed information about what the issue was and says, I'm not telling you. That Dathan said that's extremely unprofessional, but you know, he set about working on it anyway and found the bug that same evening. So that's been fixed too. And I don't feel embarrassed to show my face in any of this, because I'm not out here saying I'm the best, we're the best coders and all that, and we don't make mistakes. We do, and there's going to be bumpy rides, inevitable in all this. So that's an update on where BIP110 is at. It's getting ripped to pieces by people at the moment, which is a relief. If it was getting no attention at all and there were thousands of people committed to running it anyway, that would cause a lot of unwelcome disruption. But the more people find issues with it, strangely, it can cause a loss of confidence in it. But actually, finding out bugs is this is how you gain confidence in something like that. There's also a lot of people just using AI to find issues with it too. I'm pretty sure that's why people are finding the holes they are. So that, all that being the case, I'm grateful to those guys for deciding not to hold on to issues with it and announce it, because that's just, we like to talk about incentives all the time in this space, like people only do what they're motivated to do. And that has the tendency to erase, acting in a way that's good, even if it's a hassle. And I don't really like to go to this lowest common denominator appeal that everyone does all the time. I find it depressing and nihilistic. I think people do the right thing sometimes just because it's the right thing to do, not because they're like, I can go super cold libertarian about it and be like, well, they knew that greater disruption around the time of the fork would impact the price of their own holdings, so they chose to disclose it before then. I don't need to wrap it up in that kind of self-interested rhetoric. It's sometimes I think I would like, maybe I'm wrong, but I would definitely like to believe that if there are people on the core side of this that are analyzing BIP110, finding issues with it and telling us about them, that they're just doing so because they're good people. And it's perfectly possible to be a good person and write code for Bitcoin Core. And that's, I thank them, and I think it's appropriate to do that. It sucks that the pitch and the temperature of the discussion means that you don't get very many of these opportunities to acknowledge the good things other people do when they're not on your side of it. But I would be remiss if I didn't. So I definitely want to take the time to acknowledge that. So there's BIP110. You have more news, which is Hodlernaut, who's obviously legendary. He's pleb, but ascended pleb, right? Because he's been through the ringer with Craig Wright suing him as well. He won against Craig Wright. He stood his ground. Clearly a badass, like clearly a very, very high integrity person who has stood up and taken heat for Bitcoin's benefit and sacrificed lots of time and money in order to do that. And everyone respects him for that, and it's well deserved. He was on hiatus for a while. He came back and was like, "Core suck. I'm running knots. I'm running BIP110." And today he said, there isn't a lot of content in what he said, but he just said, "I'm withdrawing my support for BIP110 after a conversation with Wise Giacomo Zucco." And he doesn't really allude to much apart from there being his assumption being that it wouldn't get any hash rate, and that that there are too many red flags. So I I'm not sure exactly how to put that. It seems a bit white coat disease. Like Giacomo's very respected. So if you have a one-on-one conversation with you and he's saying, this thing sucks, that's enough right there to just kind of completely suck all of the energy out of it with regard to your own motivation. And of course, the thing I pounced on was the appeal to hash rate, because that's completely wrong. It cannot be the case. And this is, again, I want to go back. I'm trying to make a kind of thread for this video here. I said there wouldn't be one, but there is one. And what it is you have to get stuff actually correct. You can't be a small blocker because the core devs are just right about everything all the time. And Roger Ver is lying and Coinbase suck. That's not a good reason for it. And a lot of people are just small blockers because of that. And that becomes clear, especially when you look at people like Tone Vays. He has no idea what he's talking about in this discussion, but he's just looking at the people and saying, well, core are probably right. And the people that aren't core are probably trying to hijack Bitcoin like Roger did. It's nonsense. And I used to look at the debates Tone had with Roger, and I'd be like, I'm on Tone's side, but everything Tone is saying is logically incoherent. None of those are good reasons for why we need small blocks. You're just on the right side, but you're not on the right side for any good reason. So, to tie that back to the Hodlernaut post today, what Hodlernaut says, I don't want to criticize him too harshly because I do think he's being genuine, but I do think there's a lack of thought here. And this goes for, like I said, I wasn't going to be kind to anyone. This goes for loads of people on the BIP110 side as much as it does for everyone else. It gets emotional and people don't have their reasoning properly ironed out for why they support what they support. They're going off of vibes, and that is reasonable in some ways, but there's a limit to it. There are things BIP110 does and doesn't do that people are unclear about on both sides. And if your reason for supporting BIP110 is not sound, then a conversation with Giacomo will very quickly make you go, maybe I'm wrong about this. And that appears to be what's happened, because the reneging your support on it and citing the fact that there may not be any hash rate, that goes to show me that you haven't understood a fundamental element of how these things come to be. Because the implications of that, as I pointed out, are two companies. If Foundry and Bitmain for some reason said BIP110 is okay, or some other BIP is okay, and started signaling for it after having published it somewhere, presumably with some information about what it did, even if it had no support from the nodes, they just said, well, we're activating this soft fork. It's not suddenly acceptable to the Bitcoin community to say, all right, well, these rules are the new Bitcoin rules. That's a 51% attack. It's the definition of a 51% attack. It's not on miners to lead these things or to have any influence beyond what the BIP itself allows them to do with regard to coordination. That's it. Mining is centralized. If mining was decentralized, then we treat them as the nodes they are. And if nodes are all signaling and miners are signaling too, you'd get the same split, right? 30% of nodes are signaling, therefore 30% of blocks are signaling. But that isn't how it works. Nodes are decentralized in Bitcoin. Mining isn't. So you can't look to mining for any kind of guidance about what the rules should be, because it's just a tiny clique. And, well, no, that is the end of that point. So looking to them for reassurance or guidance is the most fundamental mistake you can make here, because you can take that principle or that implicit hierarchy and apply it to other things in Bitcoin, and then it doesn't work. Because why on earth would miners go along with halvings or even the deflationary nature of Bitcoin at all? Why would they not switch to an inflationary model so that they can pay themselves more? That would literally be the Cantillon effect manifest in Bitcoin. They are the first people touching the freshly made coins. The money printer is irresistible to miners, yet somehow they resist it. How are they doing that? because they aren't resisting it. They just don't have a choice. There is something that prevents miners from ignoring halvings and turning on the money printer. And it's not their own discipline. And it's not their enlightened participation in Bitcoin. It's because the network won't allow them to do anything else. They want their blocks to be accepted by the network. And if the network is enforcing new rules, all they do is figure out what those rules are and comply with them so they can continue getting paid. If you reverse that dynamic and look at the miners and say, can you start enforcing these new rules? Can you indicate that you will? Otherwise, we're not going to do it. Tells me that the network, again, people still have not learned these fundamental lessons. There's some nuance to it, because obviously there is a potential that some new set of rules is so minimally enforced that it could be just ignored, and that it would only cause disruption if people began to allude to it and somewhat gesture at its new acceptance within the wider community, which is kind of where BIP 110 was maybe a month ago. Everyone's going to have different opinions about that threshold, but it comes down to it. Let's just fucking ask the question. Who is actually in charge of Bitcoin here? Because it's definitely not the miners. It's definitely not supposed to be the developers, even though a very small group of them made a radical change with what they did with data carrier size. And this is an example of people not being prepared to own their own garbage by saying, oh, well, it didn't technically change the protocol at all. That's complete denial of, you made a garbage can 12,000 times bigger, but it didn't meaningfully change the environment. That's not, look, not getting off on that tangent at the moment. My understanding of Bitcoin as I proceed, and as I've been taught over the years, is that there is a meaningfully decentralized group of people invested in Bitcoin that enforce the rules for their own benefit and constrain miners and developers. Again, the tone vase triangle, it's a pyramid of a hierarchy and the nodes are on the top. And that cannot fail. Because if it fails, Bitcoin is just centralized. If you accept that we cannot have a new rule set that the node runners might appreciate and are pushing for and are agitating for, but the miners decline to go along with it, then the miners are saying, we don't care about nodes anymore. We mine for our own benefit according to rules that we set among ourselves as a tiny group. Remember, there's only a dozen or so mining entities in the world. You're looking at, you've got over 50% with, let me just actually check, because I say these things, but I don't update my knowledge very much. Foundry, as of the last, let's view more here. As of the last 1 week, Foundry's at 30%, Antpool's at 15%. You know, they're just under 50% there. 16 plus 32. So we're looking at 47. So all the rest of the Bitmain pools added, you know, you're looking at 75% between the two companies. If they start saying, if there's ever anything along the lines of the nodes were trying to enforce a rule, we didn't care about it, your next halving is toast. Because why would Foundry and Antpool voluntarily give themselves a 50% pay cut if the element of it that's coercive, which is the nodes telling them they have to behave a certain way to mine valid blocks, can be ignored? So anyone should be able to agree with that line of reasoning there. It's a fact. So the only thing you have left, and this is why I get frustrated with people going black and white with this. I've been pretty neutral on this. I obviously support BIP 110, but I've offered dispassionate analysis about its chance of success and failure. If there is credible enforcement of the BIP 110 rule set and miners don't go along with it, Bitcoin is dead, because it is what two companies say it is, and they are going to turn on their own money printer. That is a fact. The reason that there's even a consideration around ignoring BIP 110 is because it's minimally enforced at the moment, so not that many nodes will be forked off the network. And it's minimal enough to the point where you can see a lot of those people just giving up and going back to what ended up remaining Bitcoin with the old rule set. I can understand that, but people need to have an honest threshold or understanding of what it would actually mean for the rules of Bitcoin to be the rules that BIP 110 enforces in addition to the current rules. People actually need a framework for understanding when that has and has not happened. Right now, and it comes down to ridiculous things, right? But people will dismiss stuff in order to ignore inconvenient truths. So, in my opinion, let's start with, again, some crude stuff. The reason miners are going to obey the next halving is because there is not enough traction amongst developers like Peter Todd and pools themselves that want to turn on the money printer and go and break the 21 million limit. There is not enough support behind that for them to be able to do something like that. 100% of the nodes are going to enforce, as a result, 100% of the nodes are going to enforce the next halving. Miners that try and violate it are going to be throwing electricity in the garbage, paying themselves fake bitcoins that no one wants. But what if that dropped to 90%? What if 10% of the nodes decided that it was okay? Of course, it's a hard fork, but we'll get more into how this relates to the current scenario. Then people are going to immediately start saying, who are those 10%? And then the economic meme comes into play. Because it matters who the nodes are, because nodes can be spoofed. So drop the percent more and more and more. And if you have it gets to a point where you're saying there's enough people running nodes on some hard forked version of Bitcoin that we start to consider that the real Bitcoin. And it comes down to discernment about who those people are running those nodes, which is crazy. Because that's a social thing. But that is the only reliable thing I have to go on. Because ask me if I think BIP 110 is going to succeed or not. And I don't know the answer to that. I'm quite confident about it. But obviously I'm not super confident about it. Because I don't want to mislead myself or anyone else. And I've already explained why I have more confidence than some people might think, with us only having 7% of the network running nodes, and it's due to some of the asymmetry around soft forks. It's also due to some of my own discernment around the kinds of people I see rallying behind it. Because those are not frivolous people. Those people have some deep roots in Bitcoin, and that's more meaningful than if I didn't see any activity or support for BIP 110, but I still saw 1,500 nodes running it. Those are different scenarios, and people will conflate them and trivially say, well, all the NOTS nodes are fake, or all the BIP 110 nodes are fake. People will do things like that, and I'm saying, well, I have the discernment to know, I have the relationships with people that are running it, I've had conversations in person with enough Bitcoiners to know that there is genuine support for this thing. So it becomes a case of, how do you make the judgment call that BIP 110, if you're ambivalent about it, how do you make the call that if you want to minimize disruption in Bitcoin, you need to support it? Because it seems like Giacomo's play at the moment is BIP 110 is going to cause disruption, so I need to go to very influential people in the space like Hodlonaut and convince them to drop it. And the trouble is, we're on the peak of its ability to disrupt. If 1,000 BIP 110 nodes turned off tomorrow, that would put us back on the other side of the mountain, where I'm saying, at this point, it's almost dead. And if it failed, yeah, probably Luke would walk away from the project. And a lot of Bitcoiners that I know would really just be they would just have so much of their passion for the project sucked out of it. But you can take comfort if you're on the other side that they're probably not going to go anywhere. They're not going to sell for dollars. They're not going to sell for gold or whatever. So Bitcoin will probably be all right until the actual warnings we were making around large lumps of contiguous illegal data manifest, and then actually you start seeing a lot of nodes just go offline. And then you end up with a situation where someone else really is in control of Bitcoin, and it basically just becomes the giant companies like Bitmain and the big exchanges start calling the shots. And then you're back in what we were fighting against in 2017. That has been my concern the whole time. But if you ignore that, because obviously I'm not going to keep making these claims around large lumps of illegal data causing problems and BIP110 wanting to stop that, because I thought that was going to happen pretty much immediately after Core 30, and it didn't. So again, I'm going to own that because I actually want to have an honest discussion about this stuff. And the dunking and people catching strays all over the place is annoying because it's clouding my ability to actually think. But people do think I'm so close to this that I'm unable to see the forest for the trees. But I am capable of making a dispassionate analysis here. And I, like I've said with this silly drawing I've made on Twitter a few times, we are at the peak of BIP110's ability to disrupt. If we go from 7% to something like 15 or 20%, that's too reckless. Assuming that is not all fake nodes, and people have some reason to think, well, these are genuinely, there's enough grassroots support from this that I've ascertained from my own networking. At that point, miners, come August, have to make the decision to actively throw blocks at 85,000 nodes and have 15,000 of them throw them in the trash. If something like that were actually to happen, to me, that just feels like a foregone conclusion that miners would not do such a thing. But I don't think it's rational for people to say frivolous things like we're just going to throw, they're all fake nodes, or those guys don't know what they're doing. I don't like Adam Back and people like that will say BIP110's stupid. Like they don't really give it the credit it deserves. And they're not providing proper counter arguments. And at the beginning of this week, I was getting really frustrated, just being like, look, there are people on my side are making silly arguments for BIP110. Shall I just target all that stuff because I'm so bored of arguing against people that are just being silly, that are like, lol, Luke coin, this is so silly. These are not serious people. And it comes across as desperation on their side more than anything else. I'm actually trying to have an adult conversation here. And I feel like freaking Marcus Aurelius because I'm having it with myself. People might think I sit here with Luke all day planning stuff. I don't. We very rarely speak. If you've ever had a conversation with Luke, you'd know why that was the case as well. And Dathan, we don't talk much either. So maybe once every couple of weeks we'll catch up. But the point is, I'm trying to analyze where this is. I'm not trying to cause a bunch of disruption in Bitcoin, fight a battle that is doomed to failure, and then just... It's not a reputational concern for me because plenty of people know that I change my position on this stuff quite a lot, just trying to make sure I'm not spouting nonsense. I'm not going to die on a hill if it's proven to me that it's the wrong hill. And this is why I'm asking the nunchuck guys yesterday. I'm not going to sit here and tell you that op-if in Taproot is always a silly idea and that you need to change the way your wallet works. If I'm not realizing something here, please explain it to me. And that was in the context of a conversation where Motorist and Nunchuck instantly got hostile with each other, right? Because Motorist's on the BIP110 side and Nunchuck probably aren't. But it wasn't even clear what Nunchuck's position is. It's just, you accused us of having a bug. We don't have a bug. And I understand why anyone would take exception to that. Because not complying with BIP110 at the moment, being told, hey, your wallet's got bugs in it, fix it, it does rub you up the wrong way. I get that it was tactless of Motorist to do that. So, but still, I wanted to have a real conversation with them and understand it. If op-if really is completely unnecessary in Taproot, I don't think you're changing the way the miniscript compiles to make sure it never throws out op-ifs. I don't think that's within scope of what we're doing here, but you can make checks within the wallet. This is what I was led to believe after a conversation with a friend that I trust on this. You just design your wallet so that if it does throw out op-ifs inside whatever convoluted inheritance planning scheme you're coming up with your Taproot thing, you can just say, all right, well, that's an invalid thing. You can invalidate it there. You don't need to do the kind of meticulous analysis necessary. You can still protect your users from creating wallets that would have addresses in it that would would result in UTXOs that couldn't be spent after the BIP110 would activate, should the UTXOs exist after that height. So I mean, I think there's been a lot of FUD around that. There was FUD around Liana Wallet. Liana Wallet does not generate op ifs in Taproot at all. That was complete FUD. Nunchuck don't really want to make a commitment as to whether they do or don't. And I think I empathize with them because they probably have 2 devs doing the work of 6 devs. And the last thing they want to do is redesign the way their wallet works for a fork that, by their perception, probably won't activate. I understand why they don't want to commit dev cycles to that. I'm sure they would if they thought BIP110 was a good thing. So I infer that they think it's either not or they think it's irrelevant. But the point is, it's not irrelevant. And I'm hoping that people agree that there aren't really better heuristics here. Miners don't run the network. They don't decide the rules, but we know who they are. We shouldn't, but we do. Devs don't run the network. They don't decide the rules. They've definitely outstepped their boundaries with the data carrier size thing, and to be honest, other elements of what they do, and more the attitude. There is definitely an attitude of resent. Gloria betrayed it, but as I pointed out on her memorial post where her keys were revoked, she's indicative of the general attitude amongst the developers, which is disdainful, disrespectful, and downright just hateful towards your run-of-the-mill blue-collar Bitcoiner. And that was, most beautifully expressed in her video where she said, Bitcoiners, aren't they those nutty redneck carnivores, narrow-minded as well. So her mistake was sort of revealing all that and being a bit open with her disgust, but I don't for a minute believe that isn't the attitude of everyone in that part of the Bitcoin space. But so they don't run it. Nodes do, but nodes are fakeable. People point out they're fakeable when they don't like what the nodes are enforcing, and they, like Kala and Adam Back, both just immediately engage in motivated reasoning again, aka lying. And I hate seeing this stuff because it becomes impossible for me to ascertain it. Look, hear me, for God's sake, guys. If BIP110 is doomed to fail, then all I'm doing is creating more disruption by pushing for it, and that's not going to do a good thing for me, for where I am in my life and how I've allocated my finances. That would be an awful thing for me to be doing. And I'm not that vain that I just need to win a battle even if I'm on the wrong side of it. If there are issues with BIP110 or something better comes along, and I've seen Luke portray the same sentiment. All right, Giacomo, you agree that Giacomo laid it out, 70% chance that we end up with, nothing happening with BIP110, but a bunch of disgruntled people that supported it disappearing from Bitcoin. And then the people that we all agree are terrible, which is the current developer elite, become even more dominant. And the response is, okay, so what's your plan then? If it's not BIP110, do you have something better? All about it. BIP110 is just it's almost obvious that it's a stopgap because it's temporary in nature. It doesn't attempt to do all these things permanently. It's not a super, super deeply thought out idea. And here's another uncomfortable truth. A lot of people that support BIP110 would support a worse proposal if it did what needs to be done for the Bitcoin community to regain some sense of self-respect after all the disrespect that has been dumped on them by the developer class. It's important for Bitcoiners to have self-respect because it manifests as self-respect for the whole project. And we are severely lacking in that. We are embarrassed on the world stage. Our price is down. There's clearly incompetence afoot. There is contamination that is affecting us, even if it's, even if it's unjust. But now you have all these people conflating Bitcoin with Epstein. You have someone saying, you have people, literally someone quit our circular economy. Like, I'm not touching this Bitcoin thing anymore. Joy said someone signed up a hairdresser or someone that was like, I'm accepting Bitcoin now, then the Epstein news breaks, I'm not doing that anymore. Like, quit the Facebook group, whatever. That contamination doesn't wash off easily. It's awful. And instead of owning it, no, that's another point entirely. But the point is, Bitcoin is embarrassed on the world stage, and Bitcoiners take pride in what they do. They've been taught for ages that they're financial terrorists, and that they're environmental terrorists, and that they're money launderers, and that they're financing actual terrorists. And these have been narratives that have plagued us for years, and we've had to be proud of what we are, and stand up for it, and fight to get the thing to where it's gotten, and for it to be accepted. And that's been a horrible, thankless task, orange pilling people. And then you have these fucking developers talking to them like they're all technically illiterate and they can be dismissed. Oh, it's Twitter, idiots on Twitter. Just mockery from these ignorant devs coming from shitcoin land a couple of years ago, sleeping their way into the whole thing. Have you any idea how that is going to be perceived by people that have done the kinds of efforts that have been made for Bitcoin? It's so to act like that, and the outpouring of sympathy and, well, good job, idiot Bitcoiners. You've lost us one of the best core developers we've ever had. This like group therapy session they had when I'm sorry, but you don't come into a project or any open source project and shit all over the users of it and expect them to say thanks for the hat. That is just not appropriate at all. And it's utterly valid for Bitcoiners to say, that's it. I'm kicking these people out right now. And this is why I'm making the point that rage and that passion, you're not going to get shelling points around other things. So, Giacomo, if you want to pick and choose, oh, I don't like this, and we could do that, and we need another 2 months to do this, have at it. But you're not being at all realistic around how shelling points form. If you genuinely are unsatisfied with Bitcoin Core, Jimmy Song, Tone Vase, who says, I agree, they're not what they used to be, Giacomo, there's all these people, all these fence sitters, even Adam. In private, Adam is sitting there like, oh, that fucking video of Gloria. Like, we're all utterly embarrassed and humiliated by this stuff. What's your solution? Do you have some other vehicle that we can rally around and find a way to move forward here? Because the spam topic is an evergreen, perennial struggle. We're going to have to refight that battle over and over again. There's always going to be assholes like Jameson Lopp coming in, contaminating the conversation, pretending doing anything about parasitic activity on Bitcoin is censorship. We're always going to have to deal with these people making awful arguments like that. That's an unresolvable battle, but it has to be fought forever. The contiguous data thing is black and white, and BIP 110 fixes it. Now that the bugs have been resolved, BIP 110 just says, look, here's where we have to draw the line. This cannot just be an unadulterated database of CSAM. It can't be that. And it can turn into that at some point. We have to have a credible thing we can stand on the world stage and say, we did our best to prevent it. Core welcomed it in. Hasn't happened yet. I'm very happy to admit that I was overly alarmist with it, and people accuse me of fear-mongering all the time, but it was an authentic belief at the time. And I still believe it to be a massive existential risk for Bitcoin, and I mean that. And I know people consider that fear-mongering, but I'm telling you what I actually think. So that being the case, it makes perfect sense at this juncture in Bitcoin to reject the statement that was made with Core 30. And they call it a virtue signal. And then I say, well, if it's virtue signals do a heck of a lot more than people think in this space. If that's all it is, it's not just a virtue signal, but especially with Citria. Because if you virtue signal against Citria, then they literally can't use your node because your mempool is closed to them. And if people do that by default, then they literally can't use the Bitcoin network anymore. They're done. If you want to just call that a virtue signal, then I'm being overly kind to them when I accept that framing, because it is just fundamentally more than that. If you refuse to relay the things that you disapprove of, they die. Not just because of you, but because of everyone enjoying that. Think about how all the social norms are enforced, and think about how crude it would need to be if laws were necessary for all that stuff. It doesn't work that way. People act the way they work. Look, the laws are the consensus rules. The way people behave is all convention. And cultural convention doesn't need to be enforced by laws, except very crudely. And Bitcoin is the same way. You have the conventions within the network that say only monetary activity is allowed. And you can go outside that if you want and be literally antisocial and operate within the law still. And then you're just a detestable antisocial person. It's sociopathy. So back to the point. What BIP110 does that's so impressive to me is that it highlights one aspect of it that you can target in a very black and white manner and say, how can we reject file storage in Bitcoin in a way that makes the correct statement that allows us to draw a line between what's feasibly supported and what isn't? I know that you can break up CSAM into hundreds of chunks and put it in multiple op returns or hack it into, inputs inside Taproot stuff. I know that you can do that. But Bitcoin does fundamentally have data in its blockchain. You're going to be able to do stuff like that no matter what. You're going to be able to make fake pub keys until we fork to an address type where it's unfakeable. We know. But the point is you have to draw lines somewhere. And if you're going to call them arbitrary, have fun calling it arbitrary. Hey kid, it's 8 o'clock. It's time for you to go to bed. Why can't I go to bed at 8:05? And why didn't you make me go to bed at 7:55? Look, it's just some structure, okay? It's necessary to have something that we can all agree on and operate with some level of consistency and understanding. Is 10 minutes blocks the perfect size? No, it isn't. But I'm not going to sit here wasting time about whether it should have been 11 minutes or 9 minutes. These are not worthwhile conversations. It's the 1 megabyte limit. People say, oh, that's arbitrary and you guys are all tied to it. I'm not. I think it should be smaller. But the point is, it is what it is and it needs to be what it is. So if you have a definition that says, look, contiguous data is where we drew the line. Is there a philosophical debate around that, Jack Mo? Sure, there is. Because there are capacities in which we could have the chain fill up with non-contiguous abusive imagery and media as well, and have basically the same problem on our hands as well. But we have to draw the line somewhere, and drawing lines is how you establish Schelling points. And if you're not interested in establishing Schelling points, then you can be right on Twitter all day and never get anywhere. And this is not libertarianism. This is not principled. It's pacifism. It's complete nihilism at the end, because you just end up going along with the violence of others and just patting yourself on the back for not participating in it. That's the ultimate in pacifism. And it's bullshit, because people want to co-opt Bitcoin and make it what it is for them. And you can pretend that's not true, or you can stand up and try and prevent them from taking it in the wrong direction and take active measures if they start gaining into your territory, which is what's happening here. A massive inroad has been made into Bitcoin by infiltrating spammers that want to turn it into junk, because we know the downstream effects of that. It corrupts the culture. It informs developers to start catering to them, as they've already begun doing. That dilutes the culture. It makes verification less of a priority. It starts talking about things like miner income as a priority instead. The only thing that matters is the nodes. I've said it over and over again. So all of this is obvious, but every single thing of it, it's all mission creep. It's all slowly encroaching. 2 steps forward, 1 step back. Things like that. Oh, okay, we'll change the documentation. It's not deprecated. You'll be allowed to change the size of data carrier size for now. We won't threaten to remove it. These are complete meaningless concessions while they continue to make strides into Bitcoin's territory. So turn that around and look at all these freaking time-wasting philosophers and ask them what they're actually prepared to do about it. You actually have a real solution. Designed and written by competent people. Yeah, there's been bugs in BIP110. I know there's been bips in Bug 110. There's been bugs in Bug 110. Oh no, that is so going to become a meme. But there's been bugs in Bitcoin Core too. And this is like when politicians start calling each other's, calling out each other's dirty laundry. I would just rather be open with regard to everything that's wrong. And I think a big part of it is acknowledging all that stuff about the heroes of the block size war, because a lot of their stuff stinks too. It became very clear during this time around. So, yeah, BIP 10 is just, it's the right thing at the right time. And there are a million things you can find to complain about it with. But your time is much better off spent just making one of the two decisions. If this thing needs to die because it really just cannot succeed, then we better get honest with the people that are running it. And that doesn't mean dunking on us because you found some bug. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about wising up and having a genuine conversation about it and stop pretending bullshit. Your alternative is you actually push for further adoption, or you modify things you actually don't like about it. So if they were really serious about it, maybe they can say, just leave the op-if requirement out of it. Let op-if stay inside Taproot. You still get your non-contiguous only requirement. Just minimize op return. I can see that as a compromise, but it just seems completely dead in the water, because I've seen like 2 people say, what if we just do op return only? I've seen like 2 people push for that. Actually 3. That's it. Like, and is anyone at this point actually interested in, if Core were to come out and say, all right, we'll limit op return to 83 bytes at consensus, or we'll just move the default for data carrier size back down there again. No one's interested in that at this point, because people want far more drastic course correction than that would provide. We can't just backpedal here. We have to actually change course, and we have to make the kind of statement that BIP 110 does. The statements do things. It won't just be a statement. It's going to mean Citria have to completely redesign, and Citria, if it's allowed to run rampant on Bitcoin, is just filling blocks up with junk that is just going to be horrific for us to deal with. It's a complete bait and switch for what you might expect from firing up a Bitcoin node. So, to continue on the thought, I will reiterate that I consider BIP 110 to be incredibly disruptive at the moment. I think if it carries on at the current rate of adoption, as in if it stays where it is, it doesn't increase anymore, then I really do expect chaos in early August. It's not September 1st, it's early August when mandatory signaling begins. And then if miners are mining blocks that don't signal, they are going to get thrown in the trash by thousands of node runners, and those node runners are going to get forked off the network. Whether they get blocks or not, who knows? There's definitely going to be people mining on that chain. It might be, a dozen petahash or something that takes an entire year to find a block, at which point there'd probably be energy around doing some sort of emergency correction for that, and it starts to feel very Bitcoin cashy indeed, which would be awful, right? But at the same time, you're not necessarily against that because it might be a proof of work change rather than a crude difficulty hack. And if that's the case, then there's no more Bitmain. And we've dealt with the main source of centralization in Bitcoin. So there's silver linings to it. But I have no idea the price implications of it. It would be very complicated indeed. There's a lot of scenarios there, and I've tried to go through all of them in my head, and every time there's another branch of the tree. Because this is soft fork territory. The hard fork of Bcash was super clean, but soft fork territory is not as clean. There are just more initial scenarios to take into account. And you have things going wrong as well, unpredictable things, bugs that people didn't expect. Today, the curveball around the consensus bug that Lorenk found, if that had happened at the fork height, that would have created even more of a cluster frick. So, yeah, I'm looking for simply dissuading people and saying, look, it's just Luke and a couple of nut jobs on Twitter. Just ignore it, withdraw your support from it, and it'll die on the vine. I think I think if there were like a couple of hundred nodes, you could say that. But the fact that there's a couple of thousand nodes means you can't. And the caliber of the people I know that are supporting it, that gives me the social proof I need to ascertain that there is real energy behind this, means I don't think you can assume you're at that stage anymore. And people keep telling me I'm too close to this. You can't see it clearly. I don't think I'm lying to myself there. I think there are enough Bitcoiners that are going to commit to this thing, provided it stays roughly as respected as it is and the competence remains. It's not suddenly embarrassingly bad with bugs. I think if that continues, then it's already past the point where it can just be ignored and dismissed and people can hope it dies on the vine. They need to actively come up with something better, or they need to convince us to drop it through some other means, or they just need to adopt it. And I've kind of gotten to the end in my head, but again, I guess I'll just come back to the final message on it, which is humility. And oh yeah, this is a point I really wanted to make in this video. I've been through this a few times in Bitcoin, and I have made a mistake repeatedly in my own actions that I regret, which is that I came into things with too much confidence and too much conviction that the people that disagreed with me were all doing so because they were acting in bad faith, or they were just idiots, or something like that. And I was too emotional to see that they had a point. And that's obviously true with the Bcash stuff and all the dirt they dug up on the funding for Bitcoin and all that stuff. It was mired in dishonesty, and I'm not going to be too harsh on myself for it, but a lot of the hero worshipping of people like Greg and people like Peter Todd, I was wrong to dismiss all of the concerns around them, because it turns out they're just as capable of dishonesty. And I didn't really finish the point with Greg earlier, but he might well have not known about the dodgy funding for Blockstream, and therefore he wasn't intentionally lying. But has he come forward and owned it? Has Adam said anything about that 3-day stint where Austin and him were organizing to go to Epstein Island? They never commented on it. Now that to me shows a lack of integrity. I'm going to own that stuff. If I'm ever in a compromising situation like that, I'm not going to expect you to ever take me seriously again if I don't come clean about it. But anyway, back to what I've learned from the last few wars. The SegWit conflict, I was massively confident in SegWit's ability and the wrongness of the other side. And I went in with much wider-eyed enthusiasm and much more, I guess, naivety. And it turns out SegWit has some ugly aspects to it I don't like. It made blocks bigger, which I didn't even realize until halfway through the fight. I never realized there was a compromised block size increase in there. I never knew that. There are things about the witness discount I really dislike. And there were other lessons about it too. And I guess the other thing I would take is that I let myself believe that we just had everything correct on our side, and we were not coercing anyone into accepting a chain they didn't want. I let myself believe these things because they're comfortable, but they're not true. And this was the point I tried to convey in El Salvador, that when people are saying, look, BIP 110 doesn't have consensus, and rather than say it does, I'm just going to say consensus is a nice to have. I know we don't have it for BIP 110, but I know we didn't have it for SegWit either, and we just did it anyway. And admitting that we just grabbed it and made Bitcoin what it is we want, and pretended it wasn't a change because it wasn't a hard fork, it's dishonest. And I've let myself sit with that narrative for too many years. Bitcoin is what the Bitcoiners say it is, and there is an element of coercion in that. And I've made my peace with that. I'm no longer going to pretend that doesn't exist. It's a thing that most Bitcoiners are not masochistic enough to delve into and reconcile in their own head. To them, Bitcoin is permissionless, freedom, everything. Stop trying to control people, blah, blah, blah. And they're just wrong. It is the most rigid, punishing system imaginable that refuses to allow people to operate outside of the boundaries it imposes. And those boundaries get moved by Bitcoiners themselves, sometimes in a way that others don't like. And it's happened in the past, and that's what BIP110 attempts to do now as well. And rather than sit here and be like, no, we have consensus, we're on the right side, everyone against us is a liar. No, it's not that simple. I think that other people are wrong and misguided, and they're making a mistake, and I'm not about to let their mistake drive the whole bus off the edge of the cliff. That is where I'm at now. And that is where I was at with SegWit. I thought this has to be done. And if people are arguing against me, like, they're just so wrong that, I mean, look, it's very important to acknowledge that about it. There are, Zenda said, hard forks are honorable because you're saying, these are the rules and I'm doing it. Join me if you want. Soft forks are dishonorable because everyone has to actively fight against you, or you've just changed the rules of the network, because that's how soft forks in Bitcoin work. And that's why you can win as a minority, and that's the whole asymmetric advantage I've talked about before. I agree. Soft forks are dishonorable, but they create, they are far more elegant and they are far less chaotic. And that's why we opt for them. But they are prone to having unforeseen consequences. And that's the lesson I really want to remark on here, because I just straight up don't want to mess up again. SegWit had issues with it, and in my violent campaigning for it and my hatred of Roger Ver and these other people, I was blind to those issues and I was caught off guard with them when they manifested. This is the dirty laundry that no one wants to deal with. And it's the same with Taproot. I got frustrated with the bike shedding around the activation of Taproot, to the point where an activation client was released under my name that forced the activation of it. And Taproot has issues as well. And there's even an explainer video of me where I talk about some of the things Taproot does, where I get rudimentary stuff about what it does wrong. So I'm not about to sit here again and be like, oh, BIP110 is perfect, go for it, there's nothing wrong with it, and then have egg on my face and have ruined something like Bitcoin needlessly by arrogantly pushing for a fork. I'm not about to do that. I am wide open here for better suggestions and to be discouraged and dissuaded from doing it if I didn't already think it was past the point of no return, or for any other kind of reasonable adult conversation about how else to proceed here. But I cannot entertain people that refuse to understand realities around shelling points and the implications of what Core 30 actually did by blowing open data carrier size. If you're still masturbating about theoretical things like, oh, nothing changed at the protocol level, big op returns were always possible, if you're still jerking off about that stuff, I cannot have a conversation with you that's going to result in me saying, oh, BIP110 is maybe a bad idea, because you're not honest with yourself. The actual correct pragmatic perspective on what happened with op return is that it was a de facto consensus rule change because of how centralized mining is and because of how ubiquitous default policies are in Core. That's a fact. And if you can't operate within that kind of frame, then you're just jerking off. You're just a political armchair, waste of time. Your job is to sit here wasting people's time, engaging in conversations about nothing. I am genuinely concerned about large amounts of contiguous data being possible in ways that they weren't before. They were always consensus valid, but the only way to get them in the chain required going through Mara's terms and conditions. There was a filter. There were two filters. Now they're both gone. The filter was everyone's mempool and the terms and conditions of the giant miner. Both gone. So now Bitcoin has no filter. It's file storage, and the file can be anything you like. And if you think there is no concern around a thing like that, then I can't have a discussion with you that results in me saying, oh, I have a new perspective now. I hadn't thought this. Because you're clearly just you're a motivated reasoner. You are a liar. And I see this all over the place. So, again, I don't want to be out here advocating for BIP110. Like, there is no way 2017 me would have said, all right, big blockers, I don't want to push for a thing like SegWit as enthusiastically as I am doing without genuinely trying to find the best of your arguments and counter them. Instead, you end up just lazily finding the easier arguments, countering them, and then believing that you must be right because you're arguing against idiots and you're doing your own straw man. That's why the idiots on the core side keep saying, I can still find Peter Todd, I can still find a way to upload a PDF into Bitcoin with its BIP110 compliant. Again, you're just engaging in the lowest kind of, you're taking on the dumbest arguments from our side, acting like defeating them means that there is nothing more to be done. And it's sloppy, it's intellectual dishonesty. I want to find the good arguments against what it is I'm doing, and they're not there. I've even seen Giacomo, who's usually very intelligent and insightful, and his arguments are not compelling. Hodlernaut's argument today is just broken. If you're waiting for miners to indicate that an upgrade is acceptable, then you don't understand any of this. That not any of it, but that one aspect of actually who is in charge here and why miners might voluntarily give themselves a pay cut every 4 years, because it's not voluntary. If the rules of BIP110 are voluntary, contingent on miner participation, but halvings aren't, you need to reconcile that. It doesn't make sense. So I'm looking for actual good arguments against it, because look, it's possible I'm wrong, okay? And if I am wrong, I would much rather not be in a position 8 or 9 or 10 years from now where a bunch of disenfranchised people who got forced onto a BIP110 fork and decided to go their own way turned out to be right about something. And I have to sit there either lying to myself, saying I advocated for this thing, and I was just not prepared to hear what you said. I am genuinely reaching out here. I'm trying to find the good arguments on the other side and engage those. And it's hard to do because I'm supposed to be projecting confidence. I'm supposed to be offering rallying cries for BIP110 all the time. But I've just been here before, and I've ended up humiliated and embarrassed. And now I have a much more significant position in it, and I don't want to be in it for that. I just want to exhaust the potential alternative avenues and make sure they've been authentically inquired. So in the future, when it all turns out that there's a fresh perspective 5 years from now, I can say, yeah, I actually did consider that though. And we didn't go into it recklessly. Because that's one of the main allegations, right? Hodlernaut didn't say what the red flags actually were. But the general thing people have indicated as a red flag is that it's rushed. And I think that that's a good thing to consider. I think the time frame is acceptable. Myself, I don't think it's amazing that it's faster than other soft forks, but it's also slower than a lot of other soft forks too. And it's temporary, so people are okay with that. But look, you're screwing around with consensus, so there can just be accidents. I understand hesitancy around that. It feels too fast. But again, if you're a pragmatist, if it's fast, that just leaves you less time to make sure it gets adopted to the degree needed for there to be no disruption and for the relevant review to be done. Because Dathan is just one guy, and he's really good at what he does, but he's going to miss stuff, and he has clearly missed stuff. He's fixed it promptly, and he's been professional in how he's dealt with people. But that humility, without that, we're screwed, right? So I guess I'm just saying I'm wide open. I don't want to have debates with idiots like Tone. Unfortunately, Tone is just genuinely not cognitively capable of grasping what BIP110 is or what it does. He just looks at the social implications of it, which I'm sorry, that's just not going to work. I actually need to have a discussion with people that are capable of finding a genuine reason for us to walk away from this. And I guess I need someone that accepts the motivation, right? Because this is the problem with my discussions with Giacomo, is that he doesn't agree that the concern around contiguous data is real. And so he's on our side to the extent that he thinks core is bad. But that core being bad doesn't beget making a soft fork to kick them out. Though ironically, a lot of the people that support BIP110 basically just do that because it's a shelling point for kicking core out. So At that point, you just start easing off what BIP110 does until it just becomes a symbolic change of consensus rules just to wrestle out, cause relevance from the code base of what people run as nodes. You can do stuff like that. It's a purely political move. Like, that's literally just, planting a flag in someone else's castle and kicking them out. Like, but that's not warranted. I don't think that's. I know that that's the motivation for a lot of people. I know a lot of people's motivation is just to minimize spam on Bitcoin, and BIP110 does do that in a lot of good ways. But it's never going to be something we'll say is the main motivation for it. So anyway, I'll finish the video there. I know that if I remain humble on this, every time there's an issue, I'm not going to have to want to bury my head, under my duvet for a week and not come out and talk to anyone. I'm obviously approaching this with humility, guys. I'm not saying BIP110 is the greatest thing ever, but I also know that constant nitpickery and complaining and philosophical wanking, I know that if you do those things, you are people that are never going to do anything, and you're going to sit there while the commons gets abused and destroyed and pat yourself on the back for how non-violent you were and how uncoercive you were. Hats off. But Bitcoin actually needs stewardship and vision for people to lead it in the right direction, especially when there are people motivated in pushing it in the wrong direction. So it's time to be a little bit more pragmatic and to move it into to steady the ship, so to speak. But walking the tightrope between doing a thing like that and listening to the most intelligent opposition to what you're doing and trying to incorporate it, because that wasn't a thing for SegWit and probably Taproot either. And it was too political, and there was too much noise, and there was too much lazy argumentation from both sides. I'm really hoping BIP110, it's much smaller in scope, can be fully reasoned about, and something can come around in August, if and when it starts, or hopefully sooner than that, where nothing happens with it that we didn't completely expect. Maybe some wallet stops working properly, but all the addresses that it generated, only have UTXOs from before the height of activation, so they all still work and no one loses any money, and they would have been crazy edge cases even if they were to. Like, I want that to be the worst outcome from it, and that would be acceptable to me. And if I'm missing something, which I probably am, I just want people to know that be open to it. Bugs happen, accidents happen, everyone is learning, everyone on both sides is learning, everyone has some validity to what they're saying. I'm open, I'm going to listen to it, and I don't think BIP110 would deserve to activate if we weren't demonstrating that kind of humility. And that's what I encourage for the core side, and what I thought was lacking, and it's what I encourage for our side too. So if you're going into conversations with people and you're a very big fan of BIP110, just be respectful of people. You don't get anywhere by yelling at people and ripping them to pieces. Sometimes it's necessary. I have vented in this video. Frustration happens. Anger can be righteous. I get it. I don't know how to walk the line either, but there's no point making enemies out of people for no reason. If you genuinely believe what we're doing is the right thing to be done, we will get people on our side, and the thing will grow as it should and deserves to grow. So I hope that's not unmotivating for people that are genuinely angry, and they have a right to be angry. But patience is required, and I'm prone to getting too emotional about this stuff, and many other people are too. And it clouds our ability to analyze things properly. So yeah, stay steadfast and get ready for a long battle, because this honestly just looks like, to me, it's all done in my head. I'm like, August, either the thing is dead long before then, or it just activates. But I know that the amount of fighting is going to be just off the charts of anything I've seen in Bitcoin's history, and it's daunting. Anyway, I'll leave it at that.